Well, good day to everyone. Good morning to people in the United States. Good afternoon to folks joining us from Europe, and welcome no matter where you are on the globe. My name is Jeff Rathke. I'm the president of the American German Institute here in Washington, D.C., and we are really proud to be able to bring you this webinar, which is part of an institution that we call Transatlantic Trade Week, and which we have been doing for 6 years in partnership with our colleagues at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I'm really honored to give the floor in a second to my counterpart, Hardy Ostry, who is the director of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in the United States, and with whom we've been working to develop this great webinar with insights into transatlantic technology and trade, in particular, the questions of sovereignty and interdependence. So, Hardy, with that, let me hand the microphone to you, and then we will get started.
Thank you very much, Steph. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, a warm welcome also on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We are very pleased to have this continuing cooperation with the American German Institute, and thank you very much, Jeff and Peter, for this outstanding cooperation in the last couple of years. I'm particularly honored to have you all, these distinguished speakers for this webinar in Europe as well as here in the United States. And I especially would also welcome Mr. Bright from the Ministry for Digital Transformation and Government Modernization, not only to talk about us on transatlantic technology and trade, sovereignty and independence, but also to represent this for this government, for the government of Friedrich Merz, really outstanding new creation of this ministry under the leadership of Carsten Wildberger, which is really an important step of debureaucratization and modernization of the German government and German administration. So insofar, it's really an added value to have you here and to have you all. I just would like to underline the importance of this trade week from our perspective as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And we are really very proud to have this cooperation with you and all these distinguished participants and speakers who are here today again. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I hand over to Jeff or Peter. Thank you so much.
Hardy, thank you. Let me also add my welcome to all of you today, to our panelists, all of you who are joining us as viewers for our webinar today. As has been said, we'll examine today the balance between national sovereignty and interdependence in the transatlantic trade tech stack. Just a few observations as background. It seems that in some ways the transatlantic relationship has stabilized a bit, certainly since the Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's tariffs via the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and also more recently because of the European Parliament's approval of the US-EU trade deal. So I think that while things have stabilized, it's also, I think, true that a number of areas of tension remain. In technology policy, these include how the EU's Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and AI Act will affect the leading US tech firms, as well as, I think, some broader questions about technology governance, and different views in Washington and Brussels, and certainly the EU's tech sovereignty package launched last month is a key part of that conversation. At the same time, I think there have been signs in the last several weeks, months, that the US and the EU can find ways to compartmentalize their relations. We saw the Memorandum of Understanding and the Action Plan for Critical Minerals earlier in the year. We've seen the ongoing US Pact Silica initiative, which Germany recently joined, and that's something, of course, which is play a big role in the tech sphere. And so there are these elements out there where there's been an ability to reach some kind of agreement, or at least cooperation, a commitment to cooperation. I do think there's also been some awareness, or increased awareness, about the common interests that characterize the transatlantic tech ecosystem. Also at the recent G7 summit in Evian, and this may provide increased space for cooperation across the Atlantic, including in artificial intelligence. So with that, let me introduce today's speakers. First, we are very delighted that Marco Alexander Breit will provide keynote remarks, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. Marco Alexander Breit is Director General for Digital Policy and Economic Affairs in the German Ministry for Digital Transformation and Government Modernization. From 2008 to 2014, he held a series of positions in the State Chancellery of Saarland, including as head of office to the Chief of the State Chancellery and Minister for Federal Affairs, and later as head of office to Minister President Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. In 2014, he joined the Federal Chancellery in Berlin, where he served as division head and personal advisor to Peter Altmaier when he was head of the Chancellery and Federal Minister for Special Tasks. Between 2018 and 2024, he held several leadership roles in digital policy at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs. From 2021 to 24, he led the first artificial intelligence and digital technologies task force, and subsequently the Artificial Intelligence Data and Digital Technologies Directorate. He's also served as head of the Maritime Economy, Aerospace Security and Defense Industry Directorate at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Ansgar Baums has been General Manager, International Government Affairs at Microsoft since December 2025 and heads the Government Affairs Department of Microsoft Germany and Austria. Before joining Microsoft, he was Senior Advisor at Synolytics, a geopolitical risk management consultancy, and before that, he held several positions in government affairs at Zoom, HP, SAP, and the German Digital Association, Bitkom. Fran Burwell is Managing Director and Head of Research at McClarty Associates, where she advises clients on the European Union and US-EU relations. From 2008 to 2016, she served as the Atlantic Council's Vice President for European Union and Special Initiatives and Director of the Transatlantic Program. She's currently a Distinguished Fellow with the Atlantic Council and a member of the Advisory Board of Allied for Startups. Stormy Milner is the Executive Director at the Aspen Institute, Germany, and a geoeconomics non-resident senior fellow here at AGI. She was Sherpa of the Business 20 or B20, the official engagement partner of the German G20 presidency, and has previously served as head of the External Economic Policy Department at the Federation of German Industries, or by its German acronym BDI. Ken Propp is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center and advises technology companies on transatlantic digital and privacy law and policy issues. He also serves as a senior research fellow at the Cross-Border Data Forum and is a contributing editor for the Lawfare blog. From 2016 to 2018, he is director of trade policy at BSA, the Software Alliance, and from 2011 to 2015, he served as legal counselor at the U.S. mission to the European Union in Brussels. He has also served as legal advisor to the U.S. Embassy in Germany. So now that I've introduced the speakers, we will first hear from Marco Alexander Breit. I will engage him in a short discussion, and we will then move on to the other panelists. We welcome your questions as viewers, and if you do have a question, please use the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen. And with that, it is now my pleasure to give the floor to you, Director General Breit, for your opening remarks. I think you're muted.
I was muted, it told me, but now I muted myself again. Okay,
there we go.
Hello. Thank you, Peter, for the kind words, and thank you to our host, the American-German Institute. Thank you, Jeff Rafke, and thank you, Hardy Ostri from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. It's always a great pleasure to contribute to our mutual understanding, the American-German transatlantic relations. First of all, it has already been mentioned, we are in a time where the transatlantic relations and the German-American relations have been various states in the last years. We have been coming from a very robust friendship to a more, which we still have, to a more shaky territory when it comes to the trade and tariff negotiations that we had, and then there were other moments that kind of felt a bit like a disentanglement, I would say. Nevertheless, the news in the last weeks are great. As you mentioned, we have the Pax Silica, which is a sign of American collaboration, and we gladly contribute to that and signed that that treaty and are part of the club, which we will. And I saw when it comes to the attendees of our webinar that some companies are impacted directly by that and will feel the American and German and the European collaboration here directly. And then we have things like the German American digital dialogue, which we feel is one of the outstaking pillars of our collaboration, especially in my ministry, where we have been discussing things for a long time and get to a mutual understanding what exactly the US regulation, the European, the German regulation are about, and how we can deal with both things at the same time, because this is what the companies actually want to do and need to do to serve both markets. Maybe a few remarks when it comes to the actual topic of the webinar: transatlantic technology and trade, sovereignty or independence. I am a very outspoken supporter of the interdependence approach. And I will give you 3 reasons why this is, in my opinion and the ministry's opinion, the best way to go forward. The first one is that interdependence is stability. If you need us and we need you, we have a strong, friendly, mutual relationship that we can rely on. If you need us and we need you, we can both share to the demands that we need on our side, politically, economically, and we will happily contribute to the demands on your side, politically and economically. And both countries from both nations will be better off because of it. The second thing is interdependence is a very strong concept because it actually helps innovation, and actually helps competition. And as competition, as we all believe, helps innovation too, it is the more technological friendly, it is the more future friendly, it is the more innovation driven approach. Thus, interdependence is more leaning towards collaboration and the future than sovereignty, which is looking a bit backwards. And how can I assess certain things that I have been lacking in that department up to now? I can serve my needs better, and how can I solve these questions? Sovereignty is the concept is above, so autonomy and independence, but as I mentioned, independence forward-leaning, autonomy is backward-leaning. And the third reason is that interdependence, and I'm a political theory, coming from political theory, the more the interdependence is probably a concept that is way closer to the heritage that we have as the democratic West. And I mean Japan, South Korea, it's not a geographical West, it's more of terms of the democratic nations on the globe. We feel since the end of World War II that we think we should collaborate together, because there are autocratic nations in the world that want to harm our democratic values, that want to harm our nations, that want to harm our economies, and thus collaborating together is our way forward. We have been very successful with that approach in the last, it's now 80 years, more than 80 years. So why would we change now? And interdependence have to be a strong root that we could all rely on. Thus, interdependence is what we in the ministry try to achieve. And I come why this matters, and I come to the fact why this matters in our actual policy making. First of all, CADA. It has been mentioned, Cloud and AI Development Act. It is part of the technology sovereignty package of the EU. There are some parts which we all would subscribe are super important and are very meaningful, like open source. Open source is a political issue, but it's not an issue that is harmful in any way to the US, German, or US European relations. But on the other hand, there are things like, how do we manage procurement? How do we manage actual level playing field between US companies, between European companies when it comes to the actual needs of governments and of high sensitive data. All these things are addressed by the Cloud and AI Development Act, and we still think, and we enforce, we are a strong supporter of this in the Brussels ecosystem too, that whatever Europe is deciding here with the Cloud and AI Development Act, with the Technology Sovereignty Package, is in dire need of collaboration, international collaboration with our dearest friends and allies, among them the United States, obviously. We think that we benefit greatly on both sides of the Atlantic from our relations, and the Cloud and AI Development Act should actually strengthen in the end the reliability, not the reliability, the able to have reliable data relations and reliable business relations on both sides of the Atlantic. Thus, the Cloud and AI Development Act, from our point of view, should be a tool to manage this and not a tool that is actually impeding our global relations. The second thing where this is of actual impact of policy importance is we have in our digital dialogue, which we want to strengthen with the US government, and we had very profound and friendly and concise discussions with the US government lately on some of these issues. You mentioned the DMA, the DSA. Well, things like the DSA and the DMA need to be sorted out, because there is a difference on the narrative level and on the policy level at the same time. On the policy level, the Digital Markets Act is actually, in my opinion, too, helping companies on both sides of the Atlantic, because it says that if you have a powerful, if you are in a powerful position in global markets, then you need to adhere to some rules, because otherwise competition will be harmed. And obviously it's about competition in Europe because it's European law, but obviously on the other end, competition is of importance on the US markets too. And the US has competition laws too. So it's not targeted against companies from a certain country, be them US or be them China. It's just about a fair level playing field on global markets. The DSA is a narrative turmoil. The things that we cherish on both sides, like free speech, like the right to democratically express your opinions, is actually something that we both can subscribe to. The way we enforce this is historically different in both legislative areas, and thus understanding what the DSA is actually aiming at, and actually understanding why the US feels kind of why it is to the detriment of US companies, and whether this is correctly so or not is of utmost importance. I'm very thankful for the discussions we had about this topic lately, because I think mutual and understanding is enforced or is strengthened on both sides. The other thing that I want to mention, because it's of utmost importance, because it kind of is one of the litmus tests of the transatlantic collaboration, is the mythos moment. We just woke up to the news this morning in Europe, and you probably had it in the US in night, that the US is lifting the export controls on the latest model of Anthropic. And this is a great sign, and it would be even a greater sign that if things like that would not happen regularly, and on the other hand, it would not happen on every frontier AI model, because we can feel it with OpenAI's latest model now too, because for various reasons. And I try to convey the message that we are still very in favor of having strong and reliable relations with the US. Nevertheless, cutting your allies off from a product like that is super important for economies, that is super important for the actual competitiveness of companies on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's super important for actually stable trade relations, is feeding to a narrative of insecurity and whether we can still rely on US tech or not. So if, and this is my personal belief, but I think you can see it in the European media and in the US media too, if as an ally, as a strong partner of the US, you do not know whether they give you access to the latest technology in such an important field, it is not especially helping the narrative that we still are friends and partners, and it will actually not be helpful in Brussels when it comes to the discussions about the cloud and AI development. I just want to emphasize that point because I can feel that this is going to shape the policy debate in the next months. To end on a positive note, as it has been mentioned, I think the US and EU and the US and German relations are in a robust shape right now. We have seen other signs of friendship and collaboration. Not only the Park Silica, not only at the G7, I can see them in the G20 too. And if you listen closely, you can feel that you can hear that the US government is opening up to other ideas of collaboration, for example, tentatively to address global AI governance. I think that is of utmost importance that especially democratic countries are collaborating in this regard, because again, we are under attack of non-democratic regimes that use this technology against us, and we should stand together. I understand perfectly the reservations of the US government that overregulation should not impede technological process in this regard. Nevertheless, I think a sound, elegant, and lean regulation when it comes to the use of cyber in the use of AI in the fields of cybersecurity, when it comes to deepfakes, and that strengthens our society and strengthens our innovation circles. So let's collaborate on this too. I'm looking forward to the discussion, which I can follow. I'm glad to do so. And as I understood, I will be open for questions from the audience for a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General, for those remarks. I was fascinated by all of them. I particularly noted the way you spoke about the EU's new package and how you describe what the EU is trying to do. We framed this discussion today about as a kind of balance between sovereignty and interdependence. Would I be right in saying that, from hearing what you had to say about the EU package, that that interdependence requires a certain amount of actions by the EU before we can have the kind of the optimal cooperation? Did I hear you right on that? And so that it's actually, we should interpret what the EU is doing as a way for it to become a better partner?
To be very candid, interdependence only works when you are strong, right? When you are weak, nobody's dependent on you, and interdependence is not a concept, which means that politically, in the political analysis, it's not a reliable and stable concept, because if you can live without one of the partners, then obviously interdependence doesn't work. Meaning that the EU needs to step up its game, right? And I perfectly understand that the US worries about European competitiveness, about European markets, and how they treat future technologies, and about the AI Act. I'm personally not happy with the AI Act either. And if you read the news coming out of Brussels, as some of you probably did, you have seen the German government especially fighting for more ambitious and deregulation when it comes to AI, and we have been very successful with that when it comes to AI, and we'll be fighting with the same ferocity when it comes to the digital omnibus right now too. And it's again about AI, because when we want to ease in the burdens that you as a company have when you want to train with Europeans' data, because not every data is super sensitive. You can actually use it, and you should be using it, because it actually makes the AI better, even for Europeans to use. So we again fight that fight. And why do we fight it? Because we want to be more competitive. We want to be stronger. We want to give interdependence a meaning, and not just kind of having that buzzword fly around while we are still weak and actually dependent from everything. Maybe not while we are still, if we are still. The second thing is the Cloud and AI Development Act. You can read it as a competitivity tool, or you can read it as a interdependency tool. And I would like to read it both ways. What I don't want to read it is like a tool that's about autonomy. And I understand that some of the proposals coming out of Brussels might be read like that, and I can reassure you that the German government will will look towards Takeda with international partnerships in mind, and making sure that our data relations and our company relations, especially with our transatlantic partners, are not being harmed by whatever happens there.
Thank you. Well, instead of my monopolizing the questions, I'm going to read one that's from the one of our viewers because it actually overlaps very closely with what I had in my mind. And the question is, and maybe I'll just reinforce it a bit, how can Germany strengthen or leverage its comparative advantages in automation, industrial AI, and precision mirrors used in EUV machines? And I think particularly that question about industrial AI perhaps versus, kind of human-centered AI.
Yes.
And my question would be a little bit also, do you think that the industrial side is an area where the cooperation could develop, especially between Germany and the United States, with more ease than some other aspects of AI? But anyway, I offer that question to you.
Yes. I would subscribe to that point of view. Why so? Because a lot of the industrial AI is not using personalized data, which means that we are not in this in this troubled waters of the Patriot Act and the Cloud Act colliding with the GDPR of Europe. So thus, it is probably easier to collaborate on that. The other thing is, and this is why this a sensitive, careful approach to separating the access of your allies and partners to frontier AI models is so important. If we want to collaborate on industrial AI, it is of utmost importance that German companies that use US AI for their needs in industrial AI are not being threatened by just being cut off from this product for either 4 weeks, 4 months, 4 years, or just a single minute. It's just super important that we have a reliable relation there. I can see this as a perfect area where we can collaborate. I think there's even one thing that's more important to collaborate, and this is security and security policy and actually cybersecurity policy. Yes, the former industrial AI is where the economic value is residing. Nevertheless, the political importance is residing in cybersecurity collaboration, because it does not help the US market a lot if only US companies are being shielded from latest cyber threats. If the European market is being turned off first for a single day, the US economy is being harmed in non-foreseen ways. Thus, collaborating there is, for me, political top of mind.
Well, thank you very, very much for your remarks, for answering those questions, for engaging with all of us. We're really very grateful to have you with us. It was a fantastic way to kick off our discussion today, and we are going to, of course, return to many or all of these topics during the rest of the year and beyond in our geoeconomics program. So again, let me thank you for joining us and wish you a good rest of your day in Berlin, if that's where you are.
Yes,
let me now.
I'm listening to the conversation.
Fantastic, thanks. So let me now turn to Fran Burwell to kick off. Give you a few seconds to get ready to do that, and just to preview, we will then hear from Stormy Milner, and then Ken Proppen, and then Ansgar Bounds will be our last speaker. So Fran, over to you.
Thanks very much, Peter. And it's wonderful to see Marco Breit again and to hear his remarks. I'm going to take a somewhat more pessimistic view. I have been thinking a lot about what the recent changes mean, and I'm afraid that I'm not in a very positive mood this morning. But I think we are at a crucial moment right now in the US-EU economic partnership. I'm going to leave the whole NATO security, Ukraine to one side. I think the next year will be key in showing whether the current tensions over trade and technology are just another of the recurrent set of trade tensions and other tensions that you have because you interact with a partner so closely and so frequently, but that don't really affect the entire relationship. Think GMOs, beef hormones, etc., all our favorite past topics. Or will those tensions lead to, or are they a symptom of, a reorientation on both sides? of the Atlantic that will lead to an erosion of the existing partnership. Normally, at this point, in a talk, most of us would cite the strength of the economic relationship, 1.3 trillion per year in trade. And this is supported by investment. I think one of the really key elements of the transatlantic economic partnership is that somewhere between a third to a half of trade is rooted in investment. And of course, we have seen that in the digital space, Europe is the biggest market for American companies and one where they are incredibly integrated. But those facts come from a world of globalization. And the new fact is that both the US and Europe are pulling back from what one can think of as classic globalization. This is an open trading relationship that is in some areas being pulled away from. Not so much in consumers, but in critical infrastructure and manufacturing and topics of that sort. We've seen the US put tariffs on Europe, as well as most, if not all, of its other trading partners. And this continues to be an area of some instability. The EU, we are seeing search for greater resilience in its economic partnerships and more of a seeking of sovereignty, control, and over its own decisions and ability to make its own decisions. They have identified key partners through their growing list of FTAs, and I would note that Indonesia is now 280 million people is now another place where the Commission is seeking agreement from the Council on a final agreement. But they are also putting in Europe is also developing regulatory measures that are designed to ensure that supply chains are secure, but also to limit the impact of human rights violations and environmental issues on European supply chains. Both the US and the EU have reasons for shifting into these directions. We may not like, most of us, the tariffs that the US has imposed on its trading partners, but it is a response to a very real political question in the United States about trying to aim at returning manufacturing to the United States and building jobs for those who formerly worked in manufacturing. The EU is responding to a more complicated situation, a lagging domestic economy, one that faces real competitiveness challenges, while its main trading partner puts up barriers, and another major trading partner is exporting its overcapacity of production to Europe. There is also, of course, in Europe, a huge shift over the last 5 years in the geopolitical situation, one that has had the impact of raising concerns about resilience across the continent. To some degree, the resulting friction should be anticipated, because when you have a close trading relationship, close economic partnership, and then begin to unravel elements of it, you're going to have some tension. I think that is totally normal. And I think there are many opportunities for consultations that show that both are doing kind of a mirror image of each other in trying to address the same questions about competitiveness, a manufacturing base, investments, but also security of supply. But we are taking different paths towards doing that. This raises a number of questions. And Peter, I would go back to your initial remarks about, has the trading relationship stabilized? For the moment, yes, I think I would agree with you on that. I think many companies have decided that 15% is the new normal. And even though the 122 tariffs will be replaced by ones that have to do with, that are based on forced labor, which I think is sometimes challenging for Europeans to accept that that's the issue. But we don't know yet what the 301 on excess capacity will be. And I think that that is the unknown that we have to deal with in the future. That could be quite destabilizing, but we don't know that. We don't know how far the US will go in fencing off its economy. And we also don't know what the impact will be on investment in the United States. So I have heard from both companies that are increasing their investment in the United States to get on the other side of those trade barriers, but also other companies whose investments have been delayed in the United States or downgraded because they cannot import machines that they need at a reasonable price in order to boost their manufacturing. So it moves in both directions. And will the EU be able to build a new trading system out of its growing list of FTAs? Will it be able to withstand the overcapacity challenge in its trading relationships? Both the US, I would say as well that this divergence and uncertainty in trade has become more combustible because it's not happening in isolation. It's happening at a time of a more serious argument over digital and tech sovereignty. I think both the US and the EU have approximately the same ambitions in terms of technology. They want secure, innovative tech ecosystems, resilient in the face of cyber attacks and other interferences. However, at the current moment, one partner is dominant, and at least among top-level politicians, I wouldn't put the companies in this, seeks to preserve its position. The other is seeking to establish its autonomy because it has so far failed to develop and scale up many of the companies that it would need to have the type of tech ecosystem that is its ambition and should be its ambition. As a result of that failure, Europe has turned to a methodology that it knows well, regulation, and particularly regulation designed to boost Made in Europe, or to provide financial support for EU companies. I would cite the Industrial Accelerator Act, although not particularly about technology in some areas, trying to define what is made in Europe. The CADA, the Cloud and AI Development Act, which Marco also mentioned, and as well the revised Cybersecurity Act, which requires companies to look at how secure their components are, and essentially makes it very difficult to have components from China in critical infrastructure. There is some very good news that as the discussion in Europe about tech sovereignty has moved from being kind of a niche discussion, in the last 2 years, I think it has moved to becoming more operationalized through these legislative packages, including the tech sovereignty package. But it has also become a little bit more defined. And I would say there is more limited applications, i.e. not across the whole spectrum, but rather critical infrastructure and critical sectors, although these are defined somewhat broadly and I think could require more finesse, and more risk-oriented. That is that there should be more controls, more requirements, certifications, as you move up the chain of risk. And you see this in CADA with the 4 different levels of sovereign assurances that are required if this passes, will be required by public procurement in cloud and AI. As Europe moves in this direction, it will have to also balance the realities. And in particular, I would say the realities of its own capabilities. And I think it's really interesting to see the way that US companies are trying to deal with the sovereigntist push in Europe, in many cases by moving to address European concerns and figure out how they can be partners. Europe is also, I think, another word to think about in this is reciprocity. And we see this mentioned in the Industrial Accelerator Act, not so much in the tech sovereignty package, but there is, to what degree is what Europe is doing is reciprocal to what the United States does in FedRAMP and other programs like that. The rhetoric on both sides in the tech area, I think, needs to come down a bit. I would say that it's hottest in the US side, but you also, with the president's recent posts about digital service taxes, for example. However, you also, if you look at the European Parliament, you can also see some rather heated rhetoric. But there are some real concerns that I have about where this discussion might go. And the first is that the US has questioned the right of the EU and others to regulate US companies, even in their own markets. The executive order on extortionate fines and penalties, which came out early in the administration, we haven't necessarily seen any resulting action, but the language is instructive. Jacob Heilberg's recent piece on tech sovereignty, he's the Undersecretary of State for Economics and Business, focuses on everyone relying on the US stack and US companies, whilst I think it's totally normal to expect other political entities like the EU, Japan, Korea to want to have some degree of autonomy. And then the link that is developing between trade and digital sovereignty, where there are, as I mentioned, the threats about retaliation on digital service taxes. And we saw a recent 301 on Brazil that took into account social media and content takedown. In my view, this discussion about tech sovereignty still has considerable potential to escalate and could become much more difficult in terms of redounding back on the trade relationship. Some have pointed to the critical minerals MOU and action plan and the recent EU signature of the Pax Silica. These are great, but I'm not convinced that they are enough to counteract what is happening in the trade and tech space. It's always good to talk. And currently we do have a EU delegation in town to talk to the US government about whether to start a digital dialogue. We will have to see if that moves forward. The critical minerals and Pax Silica are largely about encouraging cooperation in an area where the private sector holds most of the cards. So we'll have to see whether any joint ventures and deals actually result. That would be great news if they do. My final point is that this tension is making it much more difficult for us to collaborate where we should be, which is in terms of addressing Chinese overcapacity, as well as Chinese security issues as a security threat, especially in terms of data collection and cyber. We should be working together on this. The EU is increasingly tough on China, and the United States could work very well with the EU on that issue. So I'll leave it there. Peter, you're muted.
Yeah, that happens to the best of us. Thank you for notifying me on that. What I wanted to say, and what I'll say again, is thank you, Fran, and that I'm pleased to turn it over to you, Stormy Milner.
Well, this was already so rich, two very insightful presentations, and it's great to come after both Marco and Fran. I might be a little bit in the middle of the two of you. Where I come from, ideological-wise, historical-wise, I would put myself right into the interdependence camp in which Marco still placed himself. And I still start all my presentations with underlining that trade is good. Trade is great. We like trade. Trade creates tremendous welfare effects, lifted billions of people out of poverty, and makes our lives so much better, healthier, more prosperous. And we should not just look at trade from a security perspective. And I think it makes sense to underline this because we have lots of communities and lots of discussions where trade is only now discussed as a vulnerability and as a problem. Not in this circle, I would say, but it makes sense to just start out with this saying trade is generally good and we should keep on pursuing this. Where I differ a little bit to Marco is by having a look at interdependencies, I would say that these can, under certain circumstances, become problems. And we have tons of evidence for this. And I don't need to repeat this. It was very painful for us here in Germany, our dependence on Russian gas. And it gave us some really big lessons learned. And also dependencies where, I mean, we have tons of examples. Rare earth, China, restrictions on exports to Japan and other countries. So there are tons of examples. So I would say that interdependencies become then a problem when they are dependencies rather than interdependencies, and they are not mutual. And they're not mutual in the same areas. And they are not mutual in critical areas. They also become a problem when countries follow different rationales. And maybe sometimes we don't see that quickly enough and think that everybody follows a economic rationale, which makes sense from our point of view, but other countries under other rationales. So if countries have different rationales, different national interests, and also different value propositions, then they can become a problem. I would also say that they become a problem when mechanisms for conflict management do not work anymore, either formalized ones or informal ones. They also become a problem when trust breaks down and when we do not believe that these dependencies are not going to be exploited. And they become a problem when relations become more transactional and countries are actually willing to use these dependencies for their own gains. And I would say, unfortunately, we are living in this world and we need to consider this. And we need to have a very close look at our relationships and our dependencies and be honest with each other where we have mutual dependencies, where we follow similar interests and rationales and values, and where we are not. And this accounts for our relationship with China, obviously, but also with regard to the United States. This brings me to the point of where do we currently stand in our relationship in the United States? Is it broken or is it not broken? Is it a fundamentally different relationship in the past or not? And there I have to say I agree with Fran. There are tons of examples where our relationship still does work. It works on the state-to-state level. It works on the city-to-city level. There are also tremendous amount of data points in our economic relationship, which underlines how well it works. It is also the people-to-people ties which still work. So I would say it's not fundamentally broken, but I would also say it is fundamentally different than 20 years ago. And this is not going to change again. And it is different because we also have apart from all the things around Trump and our own sovereignty debates here, we are facing a generational change. And the generation which experienced the Second World War, the Cold War period, or were childs of the Cold War period, we are going to be slowly replaced by a younger generation for whom the transatlantic relationship is not an automatism anymore. And we see it a lot in our projects. It is also not the same anymore because we do pursue slightly different, or we do have different interpretations of the world. And we do pursue, as Fran so eloquently, much better than I ever could, explained, follow slightly different interests, rationales, and are also willing to use different policy measures and policy instruments. So there is a change. There's also a very big change of narratives on both sides of the Atlantic. We encounter it a lot when we are in the United States. We are still very much welcomed with our project when we go to the state level, but we hear it over and over again. The Europeans or Germans have exploited the United States. We are so prosperous or have a great welfare system because the United States took care of our security. In part, that's true, but many other narratives. And it's not a narrative which is just like there today and gone tomorrow, but it has trickled down, and I would say it festered, and it is informing also thinking of people who would usually be more inclined to be transatlanticists. And then we also have the developments on the European side, a loss of trust in the United States, a sovereignty debate, the looking for other partners, all of this which Fran explained. And is this going to change when the midterms are going to bring more Democrats into Congress? No, certainly not. Is it going to change when there is a new president in the United States, maybe a Democratic one in 2 years' time? No, because these are very structural factors, and it's something we do have to live with. Which brings me to my last point. What does living with mean? It means for the EU, point one, not to focus exclusively on sovereignty issues, but focus very much on competitiveness, because sovereignty we will never reach without competitiveness, and there's tons to do. And it is not a matter of not knowing what we need to do, but rather of how to do it. The manuals are kind of on the table already. It's a matter of reducing critical dependencies in strategic issue areas. It's a matter of looking for new partners and partnerships, fostering and concluding functional partnerships according to where we have aligned interests, reconnecting a little bit the idea that all functional partnerships also have to be value partnerships. That's probably not going to work. Also much more speak with one voice and and have a plan B for economic coercion. And when also using economic coercion, how we are going to deal with this within Europe, because countries are going to be affected differently. This is something we really need to find a solution for. And last but not least, apart from the functional bilateral partnerships, also continue thinking about, and I know, Peter, you know me, I'm going to say the WTO. Think about the plurilaterals within the WTO. Don't give up on them. They are a kind of functional partnership. And if it's not possible within the WTO rule setting, take them out, because there's already so much on there, on investment facilitation, on e-commerce and digital trade. Just do it. And don't give up on the WTO. So that would be my 5 important point, or 6, I think it was 6, on what the EU can and should do. And last one, certainly not give up on the transatlantic relationship. We need this. It is vital for our prosperity. But get used to it. Get used to a new normal. And a new style, and also don't think that this is going to hop back to an old normal, even if we all would like that.
Thank you, Stormy. And you know me, I'm very happy to hear you mention the WTO, especially when you add the word plurilateral in the same breath. So, but that's maybe another matter. Let me now turn to Ken Prop.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this audience. I think in the grand weighing up of positions that we seem to be doing, I probably end up closer to my colleague Fran. And I'm going to display that by drilling down into the Cloud and AI Development Act, which um, Fran mentioned that sovereignty is now moving into an operational phase in the EU. And I think the Cloud and AI Development Act may well be the signal example of that. And so I think it's going to be quite a instructive legislative process that's going to go forward there. Um, but first, just to step back for a second and look at this concept of sovereignty and how it's taken root. Fran and I started writing about it more than 5 years ago. At that time, it was primarily a French industrial policy dream for Europe. Um, in the meantime, many of the more free trading countries of Europe, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany, have signed on. Why? Well, the reasons have been covered by a number of our panelists, including Stormy. Europe is facing threats from Russia, not just gas, but broader geopolitical threats, um, pressures from Chinese exports, pressure from the Trump administration's hostility to Europe and its somewhat muscular approach to mercantilism. And finally, from within Europe, Mario Draghi's voice calling for a focus on competitiveness and pointing out European weaknesses in digital technology. So the discussion started on data sovereignty 5 years ago, and that focused primarily on where data was located. Since then, there have been enormous efforts by cloud service companies to locate data in Europe, to invest in infrastructure, to structure their organizations as joint ventures with European partners. Um, the next phase focused on digital sovereignty more broadly. And there we had debates about the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the AI Act, and as Marco has noted, those discussions still continue on a transatlantic basis. And then finally, we are now into a phase, the broadest of all, where the term is technological sovereignty. And that looks not only at digital capacities, but also at the core components for digital products, chips, raw materials, etc. So we have seen an evolution, an ever broadening of the concept of sovereignty. Turning to the Cloud and AI Development Act, the headline from this proposal was that it will effectively reserve a significant slice of member state and EU contracts to manage the most sensitive sorts of data. We'll reserve that to European companies, in effect. The estimate is that this will be 20%, if not more, of the contracts in areas relating to defense, national security, law enforcement, public order. And at a time when Europe is investing heavily in defense, and in particular in defense technology, this is quite a significant move to reserve contracts in this way. The current situation, as the EU points out in its own legislative proposal, is that there are three American companies that currently control over 70% of the European cloud market: Microsoft, AWS, and Google. European companies are at 15% of that market, and that is a share that has been steadily diminishing over the last decade. So there is a clear move here to try to reverse that trend. It does so through setting up this single EU-wide framework consisting of four what are called assurance levels for determining the degree of sovereignty that are needed for ever ascending levels of data sensitivity. It's going to be a somewhat decentralized system, excuse me, with member states making many of the key decisions, with Commission oversight. So even the lowest level of sovereignty assurance requires that EU entities host data on servers within the European Union. That is probably not an obstacle for the US hyperscalers, as the French call them, because they already have moved in that direction. Level 2 adds the requirement that providers demonstrate independence from third country laws. And this is where it gets difficult. In other words, they want proof that foreign governments cannot access the hosted data. That would include foreign law enforcement, foreign national security agencies, or as Director General Bright has mentioned, flip a kill switch to turn off service in Europe. And this has happened on several occasions due to sanctions orders from the U.S. administration, International Criminal Court officials, most notably. Level 3 adds the requirement that the provider not be subject to the control of a third country or a legal entity there. So in other words, joint ventures that are ultimately controlled from the United States would not be able to bid for level 3 contracts. And then finally, level 4, the highest level, further requires transparency on components and products which cannot come from third countries. That's a very high obstacle. And also the highest level of European cybersecurity certification. And at all these levels, including the lowest, the provider has to guarantee that it isn't obliged to report information on software vulnerabilities to third country governments. The US has such laws on reporting software vulnerabilities, and many other countries do too. So this has not been focused on very much, but I suspect this will be a significant issue going forward in the legislative process. The biggest problem for cloud providers will be their obligations to observe foreign laws, like the US Cloud Act and sanctions legislation. It's interesting because European companies, European governments, in fact, have some of these own requirements. There have been European sanctions decisions that have forced the removal of service to third countries, including in India on one occasion. And there are law enforcement authorities that European governments have as well. So this is a one-sided set of requirements. The legislation does make some efforts to accommodate the United States and other third countries. One is that there is an exception for contracts where there is no adequate or reasonable alternative to using a foreign cloud service provider. We have had, for example, France chose Microsoft several years ago to host all the data on its health data hub. So the door seems potentially open to continuing that in certain circumstances. And there also is a nod for countries that have adequacy decisions under EU data protection laws. Unclear how extensive these derogations are going to turn out to be. Now, I am not saying that it's not a legitimate goal for Europe to harmonize security-related requirements for cloud service providers who host sensitive public data. That is clearly legitimate. As Fran has mentioned, it is indeed similar in many ways to the US FedRAMP system, which is our system here for setting security requirements for government procurement contracts, with the difference that even foreign companies can still qualify for the highest level in the United States, as several, including German companies, have. Where I see the difficulty is that in the Cloud and AI Development Act, the EU, in an effort to reserve a portion of the market for European companies, has chosen techniques that create what may turn out to be insoluble conflicts of law for US cloud service companies. That's a provocative move, and it could well generate a reaction from Washington. I know from conversations with cloud service companies that they are carefully studying the legislation, trying to figure out where their own red lines are, but the overall tone is one of concern. And I know they have started to have conversations with the US government, and that conversations are going on with Europe already. And finally, as Fran mentioned, last week we saw a policy pronouncement from the Undersecretary of State, Jacob Hellberg, denouncing what he called the digital sovereignty trap. He was thinking primarily in that piece about the United Nations and its efforts in the digital sovereignty area, but I think the logic is potentially applicable to the EU. He described the goal of creating national champions as backward and counterproductive. So this is a pretty clear statement rhetorically of where the U.S. government stands on this issue. So I think we can expect U.S. government opposition in some fashion to at least the portion of CATA that I've been describing. There are other parts of it, the open source requirements and many other elements that are quite positive in nature. And what we don't know is whether this will be resolved and discussed diplomatically, or whether the U.S. is going to potentially resort to unilateral coercive measures, including potentially trade sanctions. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Let me also remind viewers, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button, and I'll try to get it to the panelists. Ansgar Baums, over to you.
Thanks a lot. So what to add to this? Maybe the corporate perspective. We as a tech company are primarily concerned with one question, right? Which is what our customers actually want, solutions wise, and we usually try to meet these wishes. This is what corporations are about. Usually, enterprises want three things. They want to be competitive, they want to be cost efficient, and they want to have some degree of resilience. Achieving all three at the same time is very difficult, right? So that's a trilemma, and you have to probably make some choices and prioritize what is actually most important to you and how much money you actually will spend on your competitiveness, on your how much money you can actually save in cost resilience, and how much money you can afford to spend on resilience, be it geopolitical resilience or whatever kind of resilience. This is where we are. Everyone who promises you that you can achieve all of these three items at the same time is probably a liar. And this is one of the promises that we've seen in the tech sovereignty debate, right? So that tech sovereignty program is both a great industrial policy mechanism as well as great for resilience, and it also makes you more competitive as a company, and it should also be cheaper because it's open source based, right? So what's not to like about it? Well, usually if you look at it closer, it doesn't work that way. If you invest in resilience, this will cost more. And if it costs more, you probably have to, I don't know, where does the money come from? From your budget that you want to spend on R&D? It's a very difficult choice, right? So any choice on how to spend money on resilience and sovereignty is a hard choice, and usually that's not the fun part that companies actually want to invest in, right? So if you ask me what's one of the main features of the tech sovereignty debate, it's completely unclear how big the market actually is. How big is the market for sovereign solutions? Everybody talks about it. In the end, the procurement decisions is going to be made by corporations. And if you look at the surveys, you see like latest Bitkom survey, 80% of German companies want European cloud solutions. Okay. More interesting is the question, would you be willing to pay more for more sovereign solutions? And then the whole thing looks very differently. It goes down to 8%, right? So you can say like, okay, if you want to buy a more resilient solution and you expect it to be as cost efficient as a global solution, good luck with that. So for us, that's a real problem, because in the end we say, like, if there's a real demand for sovereign solutions, we would be completely happy to go there and offer the solutions. And we have a whole cloud continuum that introduces plenty of control points, plenty of localization options, etc. pp. So that's all fine for us, but we lack basically real insights on how big the market will really be. And that's something which is usually underappreciated in the policy bubble debate. Governments, of course, are also an important customer group, right? So if governments talk about their own IT procurement, they probably balance cost efficiency, resilience, and competitiveness differently than commercial customers. And that's fine. Governments are basically a risk manager of last resort, and they need to prioritize differently. That's completely fine. And we're also completely fine with offering specific solutions that are government grade, serving their security needs, etc. That's also fine. The problem that I see is when the pitch for resilience actually is really meant to be a barrier to trade, and it becomes weaponized by those who actually want to benefit from market access barriers to global companies. I'd say that's a very unhealthy development, because it will create companies that are basically zombies, depending on government protection to survive. And I think this is not the kind of growth companies that we actually need in Europe to grow. My recommendation here would be really that the debate should be about risks. The tech sovereignty debate should be a risk-focused debate where you discuss specific risks to your IT infrastructure, to your corporation, and then you talk about specific control points. And as soon as we are on that level, you will see one very important fact, which is these risks are usually risk mitigation comes with trade-offs. So sure, yes, you could mitigate for the Cloud Act risk, right? If you think the Cloud Act risk is super big for your corporation, surely you can mitigate and you, for example, leave the cloud and you go for on-prem infrastructures, whatever. But that comes with real consequences in other parts of your risk stack. So you will increase your cybersecurity risk manifold, right? You own your own infrastructure. That means you need to protect it. Good luck with that in an age where cybersecurity risks go through the roof. So there is a real trade-off here that you need to factor in. So what's more important to your company? Is it the real cybersecurity risk that we see every day? Or is it a very abstract concept like, oh, there might be potentially the Cloud Act? And if you look at the numbers, you find out that the Cloud Act is completely, let's say, blown out of proportions with regard to the frequency of data exchanges there. So, and that's a reality of corporate life. You need to see these risks in interrelation, and you need to see the trade-offs, and then come to an informed conclusion on actually where do you spend your money if you want to mitigate risks. As soon as tax sovereignty is on that level and the debate becomes that kind of nuanced risk debate, I think we're in a good spot. If it becomes or remains a debate with very abstract terms that is not driven by economic considerations, then I think we have a problem. So these two things are completely, let's say, manageable for us as a corporation. I think the real problem with the tax sovereignty debate then lies on a different level, which is the whole idea that you could weaponize the IT stack for geopolitical purposes. So the idea that governments are now in the pilot seat and they could leverage certain supposed choke points in the tech stack to achieve their geopolitical purposes. That's an idea that has spread over the last 10 years, I'd say. And I think it's highly problematic. It's usually overestimating the state capabilities of actually understanding the tech stack in the first place, anticipating where the tech stack goes because it's evolving so quickly. It also underestimates the complexity of the how. So what doesn't tech export control trigger in the BIS? What kind of paper war do you start actually if you put export controls on certain parts of the technology stack? Completely underestimated how big the challenge is. And lastly, the unwanted effects of these choke points. If you introduce a shortage on a certain part of the IT stack, let's say high-end semiconductors, you basically provide all the incentives for your opponent, geopolitical adversary, to innovate. So the whole idea that I can leverage these choke points for long and achieve my geopolitical purposes in the long run is self-defeating. You are creating competition to those parts of the stack where you actually have a very good competitive positioning. So think about it as this kind of, we just added a new tool set to our geopolitical policy making game by weaponizing the IT stack that everybody's operating on. I think we need to rethink if this is really a smart idea that works. Attempts of the last years to actually do this usually have been highly counterproductive. And this is where I think we need to be much more careful, think much more carefully about what the IT stack is and what a weaponization of the IT stack actually triggers. I think the gap between intent and real outcomes will be very huge. Thank you.
Ansgar, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. We have about 10 minutes left. Let me throw out one question, which I think may help us get at something that emerged during all of your remarks, and without wanting to make a caricature of it, there does seem to be some difference of opinion on what degree of tension we might be right to expect between the U.S. and EU on the issues we discussed. And so my question to get at this is, why do you think, given that the current U.S. administration has some unhappiness about EU regulation? We've seen the president talk about digital services taxes, which of course is more of a member state national issue. But why do you think that the U.S. administration, while in a declaratory way expressing its unhappiness with the DSA and the DMA, really hasn't, from my perspective at least, used all the possible tools at its disposal to really challenge those two EU? I mean, and I don't want to prejudge what you have to say, but I think that, to me at least, that's an interesting kind of example to think about when we want to look forward towards what the level of tension may be between the US and EU in the coming months and years. Anybody like to jump in on that to start with?
I can take a first crack, because my expectation when this administration came into office and after seeing the first couple pronouncements on digital and tech from them was that the existing 301 on digital services taxes, which had been shelved by the Biden administration when it came in, would be launched. And there would be retaliation taken. The list, I think, is already done. It has been done for some time. And was surprised that, as you correctly say, Peter, the rubber has not hit the road, so to speak. There have been lots of threats, and particularly around the DMA and the DSA. And then we see this escalating discussion about free speech. I think that there are some who are reluctant to cross a threshold. I think that Europe has been very unified in this area to say that the DSA and the DMA will not be revised. That doesn't mean you can't address some of the implementing procedures. But I think there is some awareness that this would be an escalation to a whole different level. But it's not clear to me that that is a concern that is going to persist throughout the next 2.5 years.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Okay. If not, I want to get to something, Ansgar, you just said, which is about taking a risk-based approach to these questions, to the question of tech sovereignty. And you mentioned a few different kinds of risks. I mean, I can't lay out the whole category, the whole catalog, but I wondered whether you and others think that the different risks that need to be balanced against each other are somehow, I mean, are they all apples or some of them apples and oranges, right? In other, it's it's one thing to say, it'd be great if you can take a kind of mathematical approach and add it all up and then, come up with some sort of divide something. But it seems to me that some of the risks maybe weigh more heavily than other risks. And I think, for example, when you're talking about, I don't know if you want to, political risk isn't quite the right word because that already has a connotation, but when you're talking about risk to sovereign decision making, I mean, that's a different kind of risk, I think, from, say, that you mentioned, for example, the cyber risk or certain market risk. I mean, are these risks actually, can you actually sort of calculate them one against the other in a way that leads you to finally say, okay, so here's our policy?
I think good question, but I think the ultimate reality is yes, they must be all seen together because it all comes down to a very simple concept, which is money.
Okay.
So if you have that's the ugly life of a corporate risk manager. You have thousands of risks, and you all need to from completely different areas: physical risks, cybersecurity risks, regulatory risks, compliance risks, whatever, reputational risks. And then you have a very limited amount of money that you can spend on risk mitigation, and you need to make choices. And these choices are not pretty. They're not, let's say, analytically super nice to make. It's just the messiness of real world corporate risk management. And this is how it works, actually. And you would be surprised how, let's say, it's basically the core of a corporation. I mean, think about a corporation is a risk management. This is why we have corporations in the first place, right? So corporations are professional risk managers, and they make these choices all the time, and they make it in a very pragmatic way. So in that sense, if you have $100 you can spend on risk mitigation, and you have to spend it on your biggest risks, be it from cybersecurity or compliance or reputation, whatever. That's the choices you have. And this is how messy real life risk management really is.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, Ansgar has kind of eloquently explained the challenges that private industry faces with these sovereignty frameworks. But I think there is inescapably a political element here. These concerns about the kill switch and about U.S. government access to data, they're not theoretical, but they're difficult to assess in reality. If you look at Microsoft's transparency reports, you can see how many requests it responds to from prosecutors for data. It's not an enormous number. Similarly, the kill switch debate is characterized by a few examples. Director General Bright mentioned the one that's foremost in everyone's mind right now, which is with the AI frontier models and the ban on Anthropic exports for a period of time. So I think what will emerge from a political process here will perhaps not be kind of the optimal risk management approach that Ansgar has described.
Marco Bright, I think you have a question, if I got that right.
Yes, thank you. I would like to. Oh, my video. Oh, this is. Oh, I got it over here. Thank you. Yes. So basically, there's one thing I want to contribute to this debate because I think it's important to understand. And Ansgar might be right in the world of businesses, but there is one thing: as a state, I cannot hedge against regulatory risks. If I'm a German government official, I'm bound by German law and I'm bound by European law. If I'm a US government official, I'm bound by US government's law. If those laws collide, I cannot just risk mitigate that. I cannot just say, look, this kill switch thingy will never happen. I cannot just say, look, there will never be data outflux going to the US. Nobody in the US will ever access European data that he is actually or she is actually forbidden to have access to by the GDPR. I need to enforce my own laws, and this is something that's not negotiable from the state point of view. And this is something I wanted to make sure everybody can understand because it's way different than in the business world.
Yes, thank you. Let me offer one question from sorry, please. Yes, before. Mhm.
Yeah, I think one of the things which the EU also might need to do, and I forgot to mention that in my little list of to-dos, is look at where other countries are dependent on us. We focus enormously on where we are dependent on other countries, and that's totally understandable because this is where the vulnerabilities come in. But if we are accepting that we are living in a different world, where dependencies are used as economic geopolitical tools, then we need to also evaluate where other countries are dependent on us. And the US is in certain areas also very dependent on us. And we might also have, I mean, probably not as big kill switches, but some kill switches at our availability. It goes against our thinking and our ideology and what we would like to do. And it goes also against, I mean, my thinking of recommending to threaten to use these kill switches ourselves. But I think at least we should know where they are. So investing a little bit more in our own evaluation of strength and other countries' dependencies on us.
Great. We only have a couple of minutes left, so let me get to one question from one of the viewers. The question is, we hear that the EU states, from the EU states, that they're not going for autarky. So what are the key areas for Europe to positively signal to the US that they want to be open for business? What would be at the sort of one or two things at the top of the list there? Maybe I go to Ansgar because they open for business is how the question was formulated.
Sounds great to us, of course. So if there's one group of people who's, I think, very pro-transatlantic, it's probably corporations, simply because we all acknowledge that we need the transatlantic economic space to generate wealth, right? It will hurt both sides if we close it down. So certainly top of mind, and certainly you find a very pro trade group here. Well, I think, I mean, you all read the headlines over the last months, right? I think uncertainty about availability of technologies is usually not very good, because then you start investing in probably very economically inefficient and less competitive backup solutions. Again, you have this iron logic of all of it, right? Coming back to this. The money that you spend on resilience, you cannot spend on competitiveness. As simple as that. And that's a trade-off. And the less we have to invest in backup solutions, in this kind of, how do I manage this uncertainty? How do I manage the threat of a kill switch? All that adds uncertainties, leads to investments which are not economically very productive. This is where we, I think, need to rebalance. So if I had let's say, really a wish, it's not Christmas yet, right? But what would be great is basically an agreement of an accord that you accept that messing around with the tech stack is, in the long run, a bad idea. We need to have that bracket around the tech stack, that weaponizing IT, weaponizing the tech stack is just, in the long run, there might be short-term advantages, I don't know what, but in the long run, it hurts both sides if we are pulling the tech stack apart, if we are weaponizing it, if we are applying all these new export controls and kill switches and all that kind of stuff. It will increase introduce so much friction into the tech stack and into the economy that I think we cannot afford it. As simple as that, and that I think should be the priority. A kind of an accord between the US and Europe that messing up the tech stack is a very bad idea.
Okay, that's a clear message, Fran. I'll give you the last word.
Just, I think 3 points. I think the EU should be flexible in terms of talking with the United States over CADA. This is a proposal. It is not finalized legislation yet. There has, second, been consideration in the past about US-EU agreements on law enforcement access to data. Ken knows a lot more about this than I do, but it is one way of potentially addressing issues about the Cloud Act. And then this digital dialogue that may or may not be launching this week, I think that is a good, talk shops have their benefits. And I think there should be more dialogue in this area between the US and the EU, and particularly focusing on ways that specific revisions of or views of implementation of legislation such as the DMA and DSA, not reopening the legislation, but looking at implementation, might be a way of showing that Europe remains open to US companies.
Thank you, Fran. Since we're now a little bit past our time, let me thank all of you. Let me thank particular Mark Alexander Breit for staying with us through our whole very rich discussion. We thank all of our panelists, all of our viewers, and for their questions. I think we really did cover the waterfront very thoroughly. And I hope it was in a beneficial way to all of the viewers. Let me assure you, we will continue to work on these issues at AGI, and I look forward to cooperating with one and all of you as we do so. So hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and thanks again for all of you for being with us. Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Peter. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.